is hired to clean a penthouse in New York City, gets roped into helping a woman escape her abusive husband, but now is being hunted for murder. Welcome to Twist, the whole insane story told, where we break down the entire plot of the most iconic and chaotic books on the internet. Today we are going to be breaking down The Housemaid Secret by Freida McFadden. Millie from The Housemaid is back for another round of craziness. So by now, maybe some of you have watched the movie, maybe read the book, and you think, well, that's a nice little wrap up. Everything ended quite nicely at the end of that movie and that book, and you're probably ready to move on with your life. But then I guess the book did so well that Freida McFadden wants to make her buck and decided that this can easily now turn into a trilogy, and there is 3 books plus 1 novella after The Housemaid. And so therefore the second book is The Housemaid Secret, and it is born and it is here, and you're like, why? What else could be happening right now? Did we really need a sequel to The Housemaid? In my opinion, I thought no. But what do I know? Because the second book actually did really well, quite popular on Goodreads. If you look it up at this present time, I think the rating is about 4.17 stars on Goodreads. So obviously it is still enjoyable for some people. Me personally could have had a perfectly good life without having to read this at all. Because for a book that is known to be a mystery thriller, unfortunately, based on how it was written, there was no mystery in it at all. And frankly, I wasn't thrilled about any of it. But you might be, because we all have different opinions of what we like to read and not read. Now, if you don't want me to spoil the fun and you want to work out yourself what happens in the book, obviously this is probably a good time to drop out of this video because I'm about to go into spoilers. But if you have read the book and you want to see what other people's opinions are, or maybe you don't have time to read the book and you want to know what actually happens in the second book, then stick around because this is part 1 of me doing an unhinged recap of The Housemaid Secret. Before I recap The Housemaid Secret, for the peeps in the cheap seats that didn't actually get to read the book or watch the movie, I will do a quick summary, or maybe you've read it a long time ago and you can't remember actually what happened. In the second book, there will be a little bit of Easter eggs in there that came from the first book that might give fans a bit of a giddy thrill that I will also mention later on as we're doing the full recap. So let's summarize The Housemaid, which is the first book of this series. The Housemaid follows Millie Colloway, a young woman with a troubled past who is desperate for a fresh start. From the beginning, we know Millie has a criminal past. It's very evident and it's brought up quite a bit. She was recently released from prison and is struggling to find housing or employment because of that record. She is quite desperate to get an employment because she has been living in her car and she needs to desperately sort of have a bit more stability and obviously income in her life. So the book then opens up with her being interviewed by the Winchester to secure a live-in housemaid job, which she gets eventually. The main person that she's working for is Nina Winchester. She is the obviously wife of a fairly well-off man, but Nina is quite unpredictable. She's a volatile wife who is sometimes as sweet as pie, and then sometimes she will just go off the railings for no reason at all. And a lot of the time she is accusing Millie of sabotaging her life and making her life sort of chaotic when really it wasn't Millie's fault at all. So as you can see, this relationship is very balanced. You have the highs and you have the lows with Nina here. Then Nina's husband is Andrew Winchester, who is the calm one in the relationship. He's charming, he's attractive, and we are told constantly that he's certainly out of Nina's league. But obviously this is from Millie's point of view and her opinion. Oh, and then yes, like I mentioned, he's filthy rich. He's a Nepo baby who has taken over his family business, and he's very much a well-to-do man. Now, this rich couple does have a daughter named Cecilia, who isn't a fan of Millie from the get-go. She dresses like a little porcelain doll and looks like one of those twins from The Shinings, as we are told. She doesn't have too much of a role to play in the first book, so not too much of a mention, but she is obviously there just causing a little bit of havoc for Millie herself. Millie is given a small attic room that locks from the outside, which, you know, if you're a person that gets a job and you have a room that doesn't lock from the inside but the outside, don't question it. Nothing to be suspicious here. Just get on with it. I guess for Millie, it is better to live there than in her car. At first, Nina's erratic behavior makes Millie's job quite difficult and manipulates the situation to make Millie look very incompetent. But despite this, Andrew doesn't seem to mind, and he seems to be quite kind and understanding of the situation and sort of knows what his wife is like. And naturally, because he's the sympathetic one and the nicer one in the duo, Millie begins to feel drawn to him as well as their sexy gardener. That's right. So not only does this household have a children of the corn child, they also have a sexy gardener that works in the garden for them. His name is Enzo, an Italian stallion that really can't speak too much English, but keeps staring at Millie for some reason. And with the words that he's able to get in Italian, he tells her that the place is dangerous. And in broken English, he will tell her, you need to get out, but doesn't explain any further of why that is, just you need to get out constantly. In the first book, there is not too much interactions between Millie and Enzo, except for one instance where, because she's been in jail for 10 years, she's feeling a little twirly, she wants to get some action, and because Enzo is hot and he's there, she does try to make a move on that man, but he rejects her and says no. Because in the first book, actually, Enzo has a little bit of a thing with Nina, which is short-lived, but it's there. So mostly Enzo is more of a love interest for Nina in the first book. Important to know as we move into the second story later on. So as the story goes on in the first book, Millie eventually learns the truth that actually it's not Nina that is the real issue in this duo. It's Andrew. Andrew is abusive and sadistic. He isolates Nina from friends and family, controls her financially and emotionally, punishes her whenever she does something that he doesn't like by locking her in the small attic that Millie is now living in, and doesn't let her out unless she says sorry and does what he needs her to do to sort of learn the lesson and be punished. And there's an array of things that he gets her to do, including once where she doesn't dye the roots of her hair and he locks her in and gets her to pluck out 100 pieces of hair from the follicles, puts it in an envelope, and once he's satisfied and counts that there is actually 100 in there, then he will let her out. So very well balanced man as well. What a catch. Andrew is the full package for anyone. Then we find out Nina's crazy actions are quite intentional and she planned it all along. She hired Millie to push her towards Andrew so that he will dump her and sort of replace her with a newer and sexier model, which is Millie. Also, Nina is very aware of Millie's past and criminal records. It turns out that Millie is very unforgiving of men who abuse their women. And when she was a teenager, she actually unalived a boy who was essaying her friend, and that's how she ended up in jail. Nina then was hoping that Millie would help her basically eliminate her problem too. And one thing leads to another, and Millie does exactly that. But surprisingly, like all Freida McFadden books, things end up quite well, and Millie gets away with murder with some help from Nina. The book ends with Millie getting another job as a housemaid, introduced by Nina from Nina's recommendation. She recommends to someone she knows that is going to hire Millie to be her housemaid. But also at the end of the book, you notice that the lady that's hired Millie now has bruises on her arms, implying that maybe that lady is married to an abuser and Millie is going to probably help with that problem going forward. All right, so that is the crazy ride of the first book. If you're still with me, we are now going to move on to the second book. Like I said, you saw that it was perfectly well concluded. There is no cliffhangers. There's really no much more to talk about, except Freida McFadden needs to make her buck, as we all do, fair call, and she has now written this second sequel. So let's get into it. The book, like all Freida McFadden books, opens with like a little bit of mystery. You are in a cabin. There is a person there fighting for their life. You don't know who they are, but you do know they are stumbling around in the kitchen and goes looking for a weapon to defend themselves. And then unfortunately they slip and fall and notices that this person has not actually slipped on anything wet like milk or water, but it is crimson. So you can only guess what that is. Then there are footsteps. Someone else is in the cabin with them, and that person is in extreme danger. That's all you know. And then you cut to part 1, where we're in Millie's point of view, very much like the first book. You go into Millie's point of view here because sometimes Millie is a little bit of a unreliable narrator, and I also believe this is the case here. That's what I came into feeling a little bit skeptical about anything that Millie thinks is the truth. Now, it's been a few years since her job with the Winchester. Millie is now 30. In the first book, I think she was around 26 or so maybe about 4 or 5 years on. She's in a slightly better situation than before. She was no longer living in her car, but in a tiny apartment in the dodgy part of the Bronx. She's working for a socialite named Amber, who we are told is a terrible mother. She has a brand new baby girl named, I think, Olive, but she never sticks around to look after her baby. She is always gallivanting around, maybe having dinner with friends like a true socialite, maybe doing a bit of Pilates, doing a bit of shopping, anything but looking after her child or looking after her home. Now, because she's always out and about, not only is Millie the housekeeper that cleans, but she's not a live-in one at least, so she just goes into the house, she cleans, and she also has to double up as the babysitter. She babysits so much for this little baby that the baby now calls her mum or mama, which obviously pisses Amber off, and because of that, suddenly she's fired. No qualms about it, no questioning, nothing else. Obviously, we're told like Amber is a little bit unhinged, and straight away, Millie is now out of a job, as we are just in the first chapter of this book. We know that it takes Millie about 3 weeks to find a job, and because obviously we are told constantly she has a criminal record, it is also a fact that gets reiterated here a lot. Even though she's out of a job, like I said, she is doing better. She is now trying to study to be a social worker because obviously that's what she's passionate about. She's dating Brock, a successful 32-year-old lawyer who has an apartment in the Upper West Side, so he's doing well for himself in New York City. And he's very much into her because he wants to move in with her even after only 6 months of dating. But she says no because one thing, it is only been 6 months, and secondly, he doesn't really know about her past, and she is not willing to sort of divulge that information yet because if he just found out, maybe he will start to feel differently about her, which could be true. Let's see. Also, I think the other reason why she's not moving into with Brock is because she's not over her ex. And who is her ex, you ask? Well, it's none other than the sexy gardener, Enzo, which came out of nowhere for me. So I was very surprised that actually she hooked up with Enzo. I know she gave it a try, but it seemed like Enzo was much more into someone like Nina rather than Millie. But who cares? There is no establishment. There's really no sort of meet cute. There is a little bit of explanation of how they sort of got together, but you don't really see the chemistry between them. We are just told that they were an item and they were very much in love. It turns out like after the Winchester situation moved on, Enzo stuck around and helped Millie with all the housewives she had to rescue from their bad situation. It sounds like Enzo is a little bit of an ex-mafia man, which makes sense of who they cast for the role in the movie, that they would see him as an ex-mafia man because he helps out with these housewives by getting them new identities. He gets them vehicles, and he also even gets them sometimes fake passports because according to Millie, he always seems to know a guy. So you can tell that Enzo is not a straight and narrow, clean-cut guy, unlike Brock. He's got a little bit of an edge to him. But 6 months ago, before she started dating Brock, she had to break up with Enzo because Enzo, who is from Italy, suddenly had to go back because his mum was ill and he had been there for a year. Enzo unfortunately could not give a straight answer to Millie of when he'll actually be back. It sounded like maybe potentially he will never be back. So obviously Millie had to cut her losses and say, well, I can't do this forever. I think we should break up. And he was like, fair enough. And straight away she started dating Brock. Brock is one of those guys that is really good on paper. You know, he does well financially. He lives in a great apartment. He seems to be really into Millie, but I'm pretty sure he seems a little bit too beige and boring for our little Miss Millie here, which is why I think she is really not that into him, to be honest, by her actions. Now, after 3 weeks, Millie finally gets a phone call and she's going to be interviewed with the Garricks, which is also a very well-off family. She's interviewed by Douglas Garrick, the man of the house, who doesn't seem very sleazy and doesn't even look at Millie's legs and boobs during the interview. Good job, sir. Clearly our standards are quite low. As long as you don't stare at someone's boobs and someone stare at someone's legs, then you are good to go. We are looking at you as an honorable, good man. Millie is grateful that Douglas is not flirty because she doesn't want to get involved with the employee, because obviously we know she does get involved with her last employee, last employee, her very first one. She's done it once before but never again, as she said to herself, I'd rather yank my own tooth out with a pair of pliers. Now, if you read the first book or saw the movie, you know why that is put in there. That is your little bit of a Easter egg, a little callback to the first book and the situations that happened there. Maybe to add humor, maybe to add just a little bit of nostalgia for you in a really weird and creepy way. Now, everything on surface always seems quite perfect with Millie and her jobs, and this one is the same way. She gets to clean a penthouse in the Upper West Side, which is very close to her boyfriend's house, so easy for her to get to. And the house is quite pristine. It is barely touched, and she hardly has to do any cleaning. She does unfortunately have to go around town looking for obscure ingredients for dinner to cook, like fiddleheads and po berries to make dinner. But with the pay, it's great, nothing to complain about. And she has money again, isn't forced to have to move out and live in her car or even move in with her Brock or move in with her boyfriend Brock, who she's not ready to do that sort of big move with. But there is one condition that Douglas says that she must adhere to, and that is Douglas is married to Wendy, his wife. His wife is very sick and pretty much stays in her bedroom all day long. And Douglas does not want Millie to go in and disturb her. So he doesn't want her talking to her. He doesn't want her knocking on the door. So zilch, do not have any contact with my wife. Just get in the house, clean, do the laundry, do the shopping, cook dinner, and get out. Quite simple instructions for most people, except unfortunately our little Millie here is not a rule follower and she cannot seem to mind her own business and stay out of trouble. In the meantime, Millie gets this uncomfortable feeling that she's being followed as well. She keeps getting this little prickle in the back of her neck, so she's very well aware of her surroundings, but she seems to be unable to read people very well, which is, I guess, a character flaw in itself. But that is the character that Freida writes, which is why I see a lot of reviewers say Millie is quite a stupid girl, even though in the book it tries to imply that she is the cleverest and very sassy girl and very, knowledgeable and a woman of the world, but her actions just never seems that way. But I digress. Let's get back to Millie and her feeling like she's being stalked, because she does notice that there's a black Mazda parked near her a lot of the times. And it's just such a coincidence that this car is always around. Now, who can it be? At this point in time, there is a few culprits that it could be. It could be her new employee, Douglas, who is starting to get a little bit suspicious, maybe in his way. It could be some rando that we've never yet met. Or it could be her sleazy neighbor named Xavier with apparently a gold tooth, who stands a little bit too close to her always in the lift and doesn't know how to take no for an answer. So lots of culprits. But the thing with Freida McFadden's writing is this. If she was desperately trying to point you into one direction, you know not to believe her and you start to think something else. I, at this point in time, had an inkling already of who this person was going to be. If you have read it, please let me know. Or even maybe with my describing, if you think you know who it is, leave it in the comments and tell me if you already start to sort of guess who this possibly be, giving you the clue that never believe who Freida is directing you towards. Now, she works in the house. Things are quite peachy for a little bit of time. In a little bit of time, probably like a couple of days, but things are starting to get a little bit iffy there. She is noticing that she's hearing noises coming out of Wendy's bedroom. Sometimes there's crashes, sometimes there's cries, and there's arguments between her and Douglas that is quite rowdy. But Douglas never wants her poking around up there and definitely doesn't want Millie to talking and definitely doesn't want Millie to have any interactions with Wendy, which is obviously suspicious, as we know. So at this point, you know something is up. Even though the author wants you to think Douglas is perfectly fine, we know not to trust Freida McFadden. But let's humor the author and keep going with the story as it is set out, and things will start to unfold. In the meantime, Millie's neighbor is getting a little bit aggressive with his pursuit of her, but she knows how to defend herself. And while he's trying to make a pursuit, she does push him and spray him with pepper spray in the eyes, and he falls down the stairs in her apartment block. But instead of the police arresting Xavier, they accuse Millie of being the perpetrator because of her criminal record, and they are suspicious of her behavior and that she is always in the wrong. She calls Brock, she tells him what's happening. Brock tries to comfort her, but he's so straight and narrow and such a square that he thinks that the law will take care of it because it's always going to be fair, as we always know. This beige reaction to Millie's situation makes her reminisce of Enzo, who would have handled the situation and believed her, and he would have handled it in a much more different way, and he would have gotten rid of the problem for her, I suspect. But also, Brock doesn't know that she has a criminal record, so it seems fair for him to assume that way, because if you are a, I guess, normal person without a criminal record, generally, hopefully the police might side with the female. They seems like the weaker body, but you never know, because there's plenty of times where victims are also seen as the perpetrator and get falsely accused all the time. But by some miracle, the Xavier problem is solved. The police gets a tip off that Xavier has illegal substances in his house, even though Xavier swears it's not his. Regardless, he is thrown into jail and that problem just disappears. Why is this information important, you ask? Well, you will see later in the book with some reviews. If you read the book, it will be very obviously why this storyline was injected into the book, but not just to fill up some pages. There is a significance to it. But like I said, if you read it, you'll probably guess why it was put in there. Now back to the main story, getting back to the Garricks. Millie is doing the laundry for Wendy, but she notices that she only wears a lot of nightgowns. Obviously, she doesn't go out very much, and which makes sense because she's ill. But she noticed that one of the nightgowns, around the collar, there are blood stains, and it's not a small amount, and it's quite worrying to see that much sort of blood stain around the neckline. Millie now must go find out what the hell is going on, because she knows now something dodgy is going to occur or has been occurring. But before she goes and gets a chance to speak to Wendy, Douglas arrives home, and it seems his true self is showing. He drops his jacket on the floor and demands Millie just goes and hangs it up, even though he could have done it himself. And he starts asking her about her marital status, and his eyes are starting to now sleaze away and rake over all her body, and it's a little bit gross and unsettling. Now, one night, Millie is out having dinner with her bland boyfriend, and she spots Douglas in the distance, who she thinks now may be the one following her. But he darts off quickly, and Millie, rather than just leaving alone, decides that she's going to ditch her boyfriend right in the middle of dinner, and she's going to follow Douglas. Now, Millie ditching her boyfriend is very a natural occurrence. It's starting to obviously grind on Brock, but he still seems to want to hold on to her. But on that a little bit later, he's obviously very, very much spinning with her. But As she's following Douglas, a shocking thing occurs. She realizes that Douglas is not alone. No, he is actually with a blonde woman who is definitely not his wife. So it turns out that Douglas looks like he's a cheating husband, which, you know, is not a new storyline. It's something that other authors, especially this one, has used before, so why am I even surprised? But the two doesn't seem to be lovely and embracing. Instead, they look like they are arguing about something. And before they enter a brownstone apartment together, it seems like that Douglas has a mistress and he's keeping her in a separate location. Now, back to the situation with Wendy. Things are starting to look a little bit more suspicious and dire. And Millie noticed that there is a bloody handprint on the bathroom sink, and there is a trail of blood that is leading to Wendy's bedroom. This is the first time that Millie is very persistent in finding out what is happening. So she's knocking on Wendy's bedroom door, and finally Wendy opens the door. And Millie is shocked because her face is covered in bruises. So you might have suspected, or at least the author has led you to this conclusion, that Douglas isn't the best of men and he mistreats his wife quite a lot. He takes out all his anger and frustrations out of her, and then as a way of apology, he likes to sort of give her jewelry, including this one expensive bracelet with the inscription that says, "To W, you are mine forever. Love, D." In other situations, this might be quite a cute little statement, getting a bracelet that's inscribed in that way. But because you know he's very much abusive and controlling, this is very much giving you the icky, possessive husband vibe, and she's like his property and not to be an individual person. Wendy is disgusted with this gift and gives it to Millie and tells her to go get rid of it. But damn, it is looking like quite an expensive gift. And Millie does have a thought about maybe selling this somewhere and it could pay her rent from months on end. But she won't do that. She'll try to go and return the property or just get rid of it in some other way for her. Now, as we know, Millie is someone that does not stand by when she sees husbands that abuse their wives. And of course, she's now going to intervene like she has done many times in the past now. An escape plan comes into fruition. Douglas is going to be out of town and Wendy has now contacted a long lost friend who is willing to let her stay with her while she figures out what her next moves are. But what she needs is a favor from Millie. She needs Millie to drive her to Albany, which I guess is a few hours out of the way from New York City. For those of you who live in the USA, you can tell me if that's true. And her friend Fiona will pick her up from there because Fiona lives on a farm and she has animals to take care of. She's not able to leave Albany for the whole day and just leave them abandoned. So she needs sort of to meet her halfway, which is why Millie now needs to drive her to Albany. Of course, Millie is now on board with this plan and she doesn't even want to be compensated. But I'm like, at this point, woman, you are so poor. And after you help Wendy escape, definitely Douglas is going to find out. So you need to get the compensation. Otherwise, you're going to be looking for another crappy job and not be able to pay your rent again. But this woman doesn't think, like I said, not too smart at the start. They do need to be careful as we're told that Douglas is a tech geek and is a dangerous man. It is easily for him to hunt people down apparently, which I don't believe because it gets told to us so many times that I'm like, no, I think this man actually has no skills and I think he'll actually be fine. Because Freida, stop shoveling this fact down our throats. I just don't believe you because I have trust issues with this author now. On another note, Douglas likes to text Millie whenever he needs her to work, and before he goes away, he sends her another text to confirm, quote, "Will you be coming tonight?" I assume to clean, to make dinner for Wendy, even though Douglas is very particular about how much Wendy is allowed to eat and monitors her food. Because of course, Millie will be going over that night anyway because it's just going to be helping Wendy to escape while Douglas is out of town. Now, as suspenseful as Freida tries to write this escape plan, everything goes pretty much to plan and it is pretty well executed. Nothing too untoward happened. It is a long drive, longer later than Millie sort of originally had thought. Wendy is now situated in a motel in Albany that Millie helped book for her so that it's not in her name, but it's in Millie's name and she pays with cash. And therefore, it's going to make it hard for Douglas to hopefully track her down and get her back to the city just before. Millie is driving herself now back into the city herself with this rented car that she got to obviously drive down to Albany. And she needs to get there before midnight so that she doesn't have to pay an extra day for the car because, you know, even though she doesn't want any money from Wendy, she's still very thrifty in how she calculates her escape plans. She drops off the rental car just before midnight and notice that it is now very dark because it's at night. And suddenly the black Mazda that has been following her around appears and the door opens and somebody steps out. Now, obviously, we're meant to be scared. It's meant to be suspenseful, but as I already know who it is, you probably already know who it is. It is blatantly obvious if you are reading the book and notice how much Millie reminisces about Enzo and tells you how Enzo is like this, you know, stealthy mafia guy. I'm like, this man is the one following you, and he's not following you because he's creepy. He's following you because he thinks he's doing the right thing and protecting you as his bodyguard. And of course, my guess here was true. It was Enzo. As much as Freida McFadden tries to be all mysterious and creepy about this, it is not at all. I knew it was going to be Enzo. Enzo is now back in the country. Unfortunately, Enzo's mum did pass away, but that also means now he is free to leave Italy and basically move back to the US and he can be with Millie again. But let's not forget that Millie is still with her boyfriend at this point in time. Since Enzo has been back in the country now for 3 months, he has been following Millie around for those whole 3 months because he thinks that her boyfriend, Brock, which he calls Broccoli to be cute and stuff about it, is not really capable of looking after her. And I would say that is kind of true because he's a little beige, you know, corporate guy and he just doesn't have the muscles for it, even though he's quite well built. But I feel like they are all just superficial muscles. They're for show, not for action, as we are led to believe. But Millie insists that she is happy with Brock, even though she tells him nothing and she tells the whole situation about what's been happening with Wendy to Enzo straight away. Now, if a woman decides to tell a man that she hasn't seen for 6 months everything about what's been happening without any sort of disclosure, don't you think the reader now knows who she prefers to be with in the relationship? And obviously they're going to get back together. That's why McFadden is writing it this way. But, you know, let's play along again and pretend that, you know, Millie's going to be fighting her loyalty and going to stick with Brock for the current time anyway. But you can tell straight away that Enzo is still very much has the feels for Millie. He accepts what her choices are, but you can tell he's going to probably still sticking around. Now that Millie has helped Wendy escape, there is no way she's going to go back to the barracks to be cleaning the penthouse. Brock suggests that she works as a receptionist at his law firm. But if that happens, then she will need to tell them about her criminal record and then it'll be all out in the open. And she still isn't ready to tell her past. But she's working herself way to just being honest with him. And just before she does, the phone rings and it distracts the situation. The person on the phone is Wendy. Unfortunately, Douglas has found her and brought her back to the penthouse. So she ditches her boyfriend yet again for the millionth time and heads over straight to the garage, not worrying about her safety, not worrying about getting some weapons just in case Douglas is very mad at her and finds out that she's actually the one helping Wendy. She doesn't do any precautions like that and she just goes straight to the penthouse. And when she gets to the penthouse, Wendy's face is a mess and her ribcage might be broken thanks to Douglas. But luckily, Wendy stood by her ground and did not divulge who helped her escape and just insisted that, you know, it was herself or a long-lost friend and did not involve Millie. So Millie is safe from, obviously, the anger of Douglas at this point in time. Now, Millie is even more determined to help Wendy escape. She can still work as a housekeeper at this place at the moment because, as we said, Douglas doesn't know that Millie is involved in any way and doesn't think that she knows anything and is still left in the lurch. Now, one day at the house while Millie is making dinner for the Garricks, Wendy shows up in the kitchen to show her something that she's found. She's discovered that in the library, in a book, hidden inside, there is a pew-pew that belongs to Douglas. At this point, you know this is not going to end well because now there is a lethal weapon that they can get their hands on. It is a foreshadowing of something not great and something I think very suspiciously is going to make it a bit dangerous for Millie, in my opinion, but obviously Millie doesn't think that at this point in time. Now, come midnight, Millie is lying in bed thinking about maybe calling Enzo to help her with this situation like he has in the past. But at that very moment in midnight, she gets a phone call from Douglas. He informs her that this is her last week working for them. Her services are no longer required and she's basically going to get fired. In service of her good work, he's going to get her Met tickets, which is kind of weird because at that moment in time while Millie is sleeping, she is sleeping in a Mets t-shirt. So she's thinking, wow, is Douglas watching me? Is he being creepy or is it just a coincidence? But this fact that we get told about doesn't actually go anywhere in the book. I think it's just purely there to always add suspicion and thrills, which Freida McFadden likes to sprinkle out throughout the book. It doesn't lead anywhere, which is kind of annoying for me when you are just giving me facts for no apparent reason. But I know you're trying to distract me from something else, but if you don't loop it back into the story at some point, because I feel like it's a little gold nugget that maybe could be brought back up again, but because it doesn't, I'm just like, did you forget that you gave us this fact, or you just like wasting pages now and wasting my time? Let's go back to the story. Millie is on her last shift at the Garricks. She's doing the laundry when she hears more yelling coming from Wendy's room. Douglas is yelling at her for going out and spending apparently $80 on lunch, and this man apparently, no matter how rich you are, is still seems to be a bit of a tight ass. But it's because Douglas doesn't want her going out because he thinks like people will see her bruises and then obviously associate it with him abusing her, which is rightly so. If you've got nothing to hide, then she can go out, but obviously you know what you're doing is a creeper and is not a great thing to be doing. But also he thinks that she's going out and not having dinner or lunch with her girlfriend. She's actually cheating on him, which I don't know how she has time to do that when he's always like keeping her under lock and key, and obviously her face is always covered in bruises. And do you not think that if she has someone in the woodworks that is, you know, she's having an affair with, that he might help her as well, Douglas? No? Okay. So just this lunch thing is enough for him to go off the rails. After this accusation, suddenly the room goes silent, but you hear a woman getting choked. So what does Millie do? Rather than calling the police or just yelling for them to stop, that she'll call the police, or maybe even calling Enzo, she decides to go to the library and get the pew-pew, because apparently that is the only weapon that she can use to stop someone from choking someone. You can also go to the kitchen and grab a pan and maybe hit them over the head. I mean, I know it's ridiculous and something someone does in a cartoon series, but this book is ridiculous and it's a bit cartoonish. So there is nothing wrong with hitting them over the head with something as opposed to getting a really deadly weapon right off the bat, don't you think? The problem I have very much with this series and with this character is Freida McFadden doesn't like to let her characters develop and get any smarter over time with experience that happened to them. You would think with Millie's past, she doesn't seem to learn her lessons or get any smarter by solving these problems in a much more educated and smart way. Freida is always happy for her main characters to be a little clueless twits, and even if she's older and supposedly wiser, her actions does not match the narrative that we are fed the whole time. Thing leads to another, and Millie uses the pew-pew, as I suspected she was going to do, on Douglas, as he would not stop strangling his wife. And the situation becomes chaotic and Douglas passes away at the hands of Millie. But it's okay, because Wendy says she's going to handle this. Very much like the Nisa situation, she's going to help her out. She tells Millie to go home and she will take care of it, and tell Millie even to delete all her text messages between herself and Millie, and also between Douglas and Millie, to eliminate any traces that she has anything to do with them at all, which I don't think is possible because I believe there is records of her working for them, so there is no way she's going to be, disguising to the police that she has nothing to do at all with this family whatsoever. But she does what she says. She thinks this is an extremely good idea, quote Millie. At this stage, alarm bells are going off in my head that I don't think you should be trusting this woman at all. Especially as Millie is leaving the room, she sees Wendy standing over Douglas's body, and instead of looking panicked or distressed, she has a smirk on her face. Does Millie think anything of that? No, she just goes, that's a little bit strange, but let me go home and do exactly as Wendy says. No backup plan, no nothing. I'm just going to go home and pretend this never happened and everything will be dandy because Wendy will fix it up. Guess what? The very next day, there is a knock at the door. Is it her boyfriend maybe saying hello and asking her, hey, why did you ditch me yet again? Or maybe it's Enzo trying to, create something else. No, neither of those boys are in the picture right now. It is a new character. It is a detective. Detective Ramriz. I'm going to just call him Detective Ram for the sake of easy pronunciation for me. And he's part of the NYPD. Wow, great. A detective. Wow, nothing untowards here. Nothing suspicious is going to happen here. But he's here to ask about Douglas, and he wants her down at the station for some friendly chit-chat. At this point, Millie is panicked and calls her lawyer boyfriend Brock to meet her at the station, and things are not going to be good. You know this. And here comes the unraveling of Millie's life that we knew from the very start that this was going to happen. Again, she's used as a pawn on the chessboard because she's simply not clever enough to work out who is the good guy and who is the bad guy here. Because it turns out that Wendy took care of the situation by accusing her of having an affair with her husband, and apparently Douglas came clean to Wendy, and Wendy says you need to break this off and we need to work on our marriage, and he agreed. And then he was going to call Millie over to the house at midnight and break up with her, and instead of her accepting it like a big girl, she unalives him, and that's why now Douglas is unalived. Things also look very suspicious because you have messages from Douglas to Millie that says, will you be over tonight? I'll see you later tonight. Come tonight. Confirming, obviously, generally when she has to go over and clean. But from that one-sided message, it looks really suspicious at this point in time. Of course, you can validate this and say that this is not about having an affair, but this is about me coming over to their house to clean. But as Millie did exactly what Wendy said and deleted all her messages, there's only that one-sided message now for the police to see on Douglas's phone, and it doesn't look good for her. But my question is, I thought you could still get messages back even if you delete them. But in this situation, don't worry about those facts. Don't worry about those information. We're just going to go with it. There is no more messages, only one-sided. It looks very suspicious. The other thing that looks suspicious here is not only are those messages looking a little bit dodgy, sent at midnight, they are sent not from Douglas's personal phone, but a burner phone, which makes it look even more ridiculous and concretes the fact that maybe they are having an affair, because why would Douglas be needing to send these secret messages of rendezvous with his mistress on a burner phone, on his burner phone? Because obviously he doesn't want the records to be on his personal phone that people have access to, and maybe Wendy could look up. Then remember that there's that bracelet that Wendy gave to Millie to get rid of, but instead of Millie getting rid of it, she forgot about it and just left it in the house. And when the police came and raided her house, with a warrant to do a search warrant on her apartment, they discovered this bracelet, and it turns out that this bracelet is $10,000. And they think that Douglas gave it to her because, they're doing the hanky-panky. And since the inscription says, to W, you are my forever love D, the W, we originally thought could be for Wendy, which is very rightly so. But it can also be for Millie because her full name is not Millie, it's actually Wilhelmina, which also starts with the W, and now it looks even worse for this girl. So things are just like spiraling out of control with all these proofs that maybe they were having an affair and maybe the situation that Wendy explained is actually the fact. And with obviously Millie's criminal records, as we keep getting reminded, it does look very difficult here because there's a pattern that Millie, once you commit a crime, maybe you'll do it again. And then there's one more final nail in the coffin. They found the pew that Millie got her hands on to obviously stop Douglas from doing what he was doing, and her fingerprints all over it. Wendy said she was going to take care of it, maybe clean it, but wouldn't you stick around Millie just to check that this was being done, or maybe just do it yourself? No, instead leave it to the hands of somebody that you barely know, and now look at the situation you're in. I'm pretty sure at this point in time you want to be thinking that she is done, and in normal situations I would say yes, she is done, but I think things are going to work out for this Millie. Despite her foolishness, despite everything that is pointing in her direction, I still think she'll be okay, because Brock is acting as a lawyer at the police station. Finally, Brock finds out all her dirty little secrets and decides that he doesn't want to deal with it. He just wants, even though he's told her he loved her, he's looking for a simple girl, a beige girl for a beige man that just wants to be married, have babies, and live a happily boring life together. And he loves her, but really not that much now that she's no longer the girl next door that he thought she actually was in the first place. And he just checks out and be like, I need to go, and just walks out of her life, walks out of the police station, and then she is stranded by herself. To be honest, I am not shocked by the way that this person was written. You knew that Brock was never going to stick by her, not like Enzo, who is really the person that we should be rooting for to go back with Millie. So it makes sense that it is a perfect break for now Millie to maybe reconvene her love relationship with Enzo, who she really actually wants in the first place. Now, at this point, I will ask you if you are shocked, and I guess by the way I'm being so sarcastic about like the reveals, I'm hoping you are not, because if you think that is the end of the story where Wendy is the one that's going to frame Millie and things will unravel for there is going to be more to this story, because in part 2, the tales get way more twisty because we're going to get Wendy's point of view. I will tell you what Wendy's point of view is, but this is where I'm going to leave you for part 1 because this video is going to get way too long, and I'm going to end this on a cliffhanger because I want you to come back and see me again for part 2, where I tell you the rest of the story and the ending and all the different things that are going to unravel and how goofy this story gets. The video will be out next week, so please look out for it. Please, if you've enjoyed this story, subscribe to my channel, turn on your notifications so you know when the part 2 is going to come out, where I do the final review of the story in this unnecessary second sequel book. But until next time, enjoy your lives, be merry, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.